I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Michael Rivero, founder and editor of WhatReallyHappened.com. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you for having me again.
The eyes of the world on Paris after the severe terrorist attacks, bombing, shootings, a massacre in a theater. Is this, again, one of those attacks where you have to dig deeper to find out who's actually behind it?
Oh, there's absolutely no question. This has got all the hallmarks of a false flag attack. We had the early warnings were being ignored. The witnesses on the ground were saying that these were white guys, clean-shaven, who were doing the attacks. Jewish community centers all across Paris were actually warned that morning, stay off the streets. Same thing we had on 9/11. It's a huge, I mean, pretty much at this point, the entire independent media is saying this is just another false flag, and false flags are a common feature of history. They're never taught about in the public schools because governments want to go on using false flags. But we have an article over at WhatReallyHappened.com on 42 false flags that have officially been admitted to by the governments that committed them. And, of course, where we have 42 that have been admitted to, there are probably 400 out there that are still classified information.
What of some of the ones that have been similar that in the past that we were told one thing and then found out years later it was something else?
Well, probably the most famous false flag attack in history was when Hitler sent his people to attack a radio station in Gleiwitz, Germany, dressed as Polish activists. And they actually took along a Polish prisoner and shot him dead so the body would be found. And 24 hours later, Hitler went on the radio saying, Poland has attacked us. And Germany marched into Poland and the world into World War II. We know that the Lusitania was, in fact, smuggling weapons from the United States to Great Britain, despite the U.S. at that point in time being officially neutral. The ship was sent into an area near Ireland where they knew there were U-boats. It was sent without escorts. The captain was ordered to keep the ship at a moderate speed. They literally set those people up to be killed. And, of course, that was the issue that was used to drag the United States into World War I. We know because of documents declassified in 1994, Pearl Harbor was not only not a surprise to President Franklin Roosevelt, he had spent the entire year before goading Japan into the attack, following an 8-step plan developed by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum to get the U.S. into the war against Japan and Germany and Italy, because before that, Roosevelt had the U.S. Navy sinking German shipping in the North Atlantic, but Hitler did not want to go to war against the United States, and so he basically ignored what was going on, and that's when Roosevelt switched over to Japan. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, the list goes on, and it is, again, false flag attacks are a fact of history, but our schools don't teach us about them because governments find them so useful.
Another headline on your website, don't believe the lie, anyone is really trying to stop ISIS.
Well, it has started coming out over the last couple of months that ISIS is a creation of the United States government to help redraw the map of the Middle East. The U.S. was training them in a camp in Jordan. They were supplying them and arming them and using them as the excuse to carry out a war in Syria that is actually against Syria's legitimate government and President Bashar al-Assad. That's why over the last year, all these so-called U.S. airstrikes against ISIS in Syria never hit ISIS. They hit critical Syrian economic infrastructure, refineries, pipelines, food storage areas, and the U.S. was going on saying, oh, ISIS is terrible, we can't get them, we can't get them. Russia shows up, and in a month has ISIS on the run heading for the borders. And so the U.S. has been desperate to regain the propaganda initiative in Syria, regain the military initiative in Syria, and we had that Metrojet crash in Egypt, which has finally been confirmed. It was a bombing, and the attack in Paris. And my concern is that the U.S. government understands they can't go to this particular well any longer because everybody is doubting the official story about it. I'm concerned that we're going to see a lot more of these phony terror attacks until the world throws up their hands and says, okay, you win, take my money, take the lives of my children, tell us who we're supposed to kill next week, and just leave us alone otherwise.
The Russians certainly are taking the area's threat seriously. Putin offering what, $50 million to find the people who blew up that plane?
Well, he wants to find out who basically came up with the plan and authorized it. $50 million is a lot of money. It's got to be making a lot of people who are part of that operation very, very nervous right now. They've arrested 2 people at the airport, and I think Putin played this very cleverly because they were very much cautious about saying bomb because they understood the U.S. was going to use it as a political tool to put pressure on Russia to get out of Syria. I mean, we heard all this stuff about the Metrojet crashed only because Russia went into Syria and angered ISIS. Now that Paris has happened, Putin has gone public with the fact that the Metrojet was brought down by a bomb. So now he can say to the world, well, look, we still have as much right to go after ISIS. We have a prior right to go after ISIS, and Russia has really uncorked on them with submarine-launched cruise missiles and long-range backfire bombers flying all the way from Russia to Syria to carry out the bombing strikes. And the reality is that if the Syrian government and Russia do actually get ISIS out of Syria, then the U.S. doesn't have an excuse to go in anymore. And that's what the U.S. needs. The goal of the United States is still to get Bashar al-Assad out of power and replaced with a U.S. puppet ruler.
Is there anybody else who might be a suspect in these terrorist attacks? And why do they seem to be based in Belgium? I know Belgium in the past has been a source for illegal weapons for certain terrorist groups.
Well, there's always a goal to sell the idea that the terror threat is everywhere. It's omnipresent. Be afraid. Trust government to protect you. And the usual players in these false flag attacks are CIA and Mossad. And if you go back, there's a wonderful book called By Way of Deception. It's written by a former Mossad agent named Viktor Ostrovsky. He lives in Arizona now. He's a painter, and he's got his own gallery. But he used to be with the Mossad, and he basically laid out in the book all the dirty tricks Israel would pull to trick other people into fighting their wars for them. One of the best known, of course, is Israel's attack on the USS Liberty, which Israel was blaming on Egypt up until the moment the USS Liberty finally got their radios working again and said, hey, these are Israelis attacking us. There was a big stink back in the 1950s called the Levant Affair, where British and American assets in Egypt were being bombed, and evidence was being left there to implicate Egyptian Muslims in the crime. Then a bomb went off prematurely, which allowed the police to catch the bomber, who turned out to be an Israeli agent. Israel, of course, screamed, oh, it's an anti-Semitic plot. We would never do anything like that. We're finally forced to admit that, yes, it had been one of their operations. But, you know, the motto of Israel's Mossad is, by way of deception, thou shalt conquer. And we have come to understand that much of what we see in the world is false flag attacks. And if you really think about it, it kind of makes sense that that would be the case. Because can you imagine George Washington or Thomas Jefferson trying to get the British to leave the American colonies by going into colonial schoolhouses and killing all the kids in there? It wouldn't happen. Because when you are a legitimate activist group trying to bring about socio-political change, you need the support of the common people. You need popular support. And you don't get that by going out and committing these atrocious acts that are going to make you hate it. And on that simple little common sense, I would say that probably 90 to 95% of all terrorist attacks are in fact false flags, committed by Party A to blame on Party B, to demonize them, to change the outcome of elections, to basically trigger an overthrow of a government. And this is how these things get done. It's business as usual. It's not shocking or rare or uncommon. It's how these things have always been done. But now the people of planet Earth are waking up and understanding this is how these things are being done.
We'll have more with Michael Rivero right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Michael Rivero. American doctors have voted to ban television ads promoting prescription drugs. Is that a good move?
Of course, it's a very good move. And the United States is one of, I think, only 3 industrialized nations that allows commercials for prescription medication on TV. And it's an absolute ridiculous situation because the commercials come on, they'll scare the viewer. You may have this, go tell your doctor, write a prescription for that. And these people will go to their doctor and say, I saw this wonderful commercial, I want this medication. And the doctor will say, well, okay, sure. And in an era where so many of these new patentable synthetic medications are proving to be very, very harmful, that's very, very dangerous. And prescription medication is a huge business in this country. Prescription medications cost 10 times more in the United States than they do anywhere else on planet Earth. And it's got so much money, they can literally get government to back off of some of the more dangerous ones. The U.S. Congress actually held hearings into the linkage between prescription antidepressants and suicide and mass violence, and the Congress understood there is evidence that there is a problem, but in the end they didn't do anything because they're all dependent on those big campaign donations from the big pharmaceutical companies.
Well, I mean, I get to see those ads on American television through cable TV. I love it when side effects include cancer and death, and yet they're still allowed to sell the product.
Well, see, the way it works in the United States is they're saying if we warn you that these things can happen and you take our medicine and they happen, it's all your fault because we did tell you ahead of time. And yeah, some of them, I mean, they'll say, yeah, this medicine can actually kill you, but the people will just say, oh, this is going to make my hair grow and it's going to make me skinny and sexy. I'm going to look just like those beautiful people who are in that commercial. And they'll fall for it and they'll go on in and they'll order the medication. And the doctors receive financial incentives for marketing this stuff. And it has created a huge problem because our entire pharmaceutical industry, our medical industrial complex has now become dependent on the American people being constantly chronically ill and buying medications that don't actually cure any illnesses or conditions, but merely treat the symptom. And at this point, if the American people all of a sudden got healthy, the entire system would collapse.
Is it true that there are cancer cures out there that would cost pennies per pill, but Big Pharma won't make them because they can't make big profits?
Well, that is true not only for the low-cost alternative treatments like hydrazine sulfate, but it's also true for anything that grows in your garden. And we're finding out that there was a lot of wisdom in the old herbalist lore, some very effective medications in there, but I'll give you a good example. One of the most abused tranquilizers in America is Valium, but in reality it's made from a weed called valerian, which you can actually buy without prescription at the local health food store. But they're trying to basically get that banned so that people who want that will have to go to the pharmaceutical industry and get their much more expensive, tinkered with version. And you'd be amazed of how many medications really are just drawn from nature, like Digitalin is from foxglove and so forth. But they're trying to basically ban any medication that we could make for ourselves. Marijuana is a good one. It's known that marijuana is effective against chemotherapy, but it's kept illegal, so we can't grow it in our own backyard. They want you to go on down to that pharmacy and turn in your money to get a government-approved medication. Nanosilver is another one. That was actually banned for a while until the public outcry forced it to be legalized again, but have serious limits on it. And what's really strange is, of course, nanosilver is part of the orthodox medical regimen. It's used in burn ointments. It's in the eye drops that are put in newborn babies' eyes the instant they pop on out. But they want to ban it for the general public because it's very easy to make on your own, and they don't want you able to make anything that you can treat yourself with. They want you dependent permanently on the medical industrial complex.
What's this headline here? National Press Photographers Association and Reporters Without Borders condemned arrest of journalists in Minneapolis. I haven't heard about that.
Well, we're seeing a problem show up where, as you know, our college campuses are having all of these rallies, Black Lives Matter, and political correctness is rearing its head on the college campuses. The arrest of the journalists are part of a pattern where the people who are holding these rallies don't want outside attention on what is actually being encouraged. And there was a big stink last week where literally a professor, actually was an associate professor of journalism on a college campus, threatened to beat up a real reporter who wanted to attend the rally and see what they were really talking about. And so, yeah, it's a big problem where journalists are not being allowed to do their job in the middle of college campuses where these huge gatherings, screaming on out there, about how much they hate the white people and they think it's time for the Constitution to be shredded. And they're actually out there saying that. Time for the Constitution to go. The political correctness movement is literally out there saying that the First Amendment ought to be banned on college campuses because it creates a hostile environment when people have the right to say things that hurt somebody else's feelings. And that's how absurd it's gotten. What are these sissies going to do when they graduate college and get out in the real world and they have to confront people with different opinions? But it really is an attempt to brainwash our college kids into not really caring when the Bill of Rights is finally destroyed.
What about the Missouri college where the president was forced to resign when the football team said it wouldn't play?
Well, that was a big stink because it turned out that the pedestrian who claimed the professor had hit her with the car turned out to be lying. It was all a hoax. And there's a lot of hoaxing going on. There were claims of swastikas drawn in poo on the walls of the college campus. There were Twitter photographs suggesting that the Ku Klux Klan had showed up at this college and were threatening to start killing the black people, and they all turned out to be hoaxes. Someone is trying to fan up racial tension in this country, and I think the agenda here, because we've seen it before, in Ferguson, Trayvon Martin, and that whole situation there, where the U.S. government literally sent people down to stir them up, because I think the thinking is if they can trigger race riots in multiple American cities at the same time, then the federal government will have an excuse to declare a national emergency, suspend the Constitution temporarily, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, and basically declare martial law and drop what's left of the Bill of Rights into a shredder. And I think that's the agenda. So far, they haven't gotten there because America's black people are just as smart as America's white people and realize a government setup when they see it. People my age remember back to the 1960s and COINTELPRO and all the dirty tricks they were pulling to try and stir up racial discord, like the Black Panther coloring book and hoaxes like that.
You have an interesting word of the year from the Oxford Dictionary. They now say emoji is the word of the year. They've been around for a while, but I guess it takes a while for a trend to make it to the dictionary.
Well, I don't have a problem with emoji being in the dictionary. I don't see the rationale for saying it's the word of the year. I think there's a lot of other words in common usage that would deserve that, but, who knows what's going on. Maybe ISIS has hacked into the dictionary system and they're going to destroy all of our languages or something.
Well, I always find it interesting that so many horrible things are done in the name of the same God. Christians, Jews, and Muslims all worship the same God, supposedly, and yet
it all goes back to Abraham, but, everybody's breaking off their own splinter groups so they get to keep more of the collection plate. And the people who are leading these hostilities, they're not religious. They just see religion as a tool of control and enslavement. Left to themselves, Jews, Muslims, and Christians tend to get along pretty well. It's the people in power who are trying to create discord, to enlarge their territory, to enlarge their wealth, to enlarge their authority over the people. And religion is a very powerful lever to use on people to that end.
Who is behind this mayhem to try to get us to kill each other?
There's a bunch of different players. We know that there's an agenda pushing a global population and a global government and a global single central bank. That's behind the agenda to drop all the borders and try and blur us all together into one mass of people where we don't remember who we are. We're seeing that here in the United States with all these attacks on on elements of our history. They want to take down statues of Thomas Jefferson. Like I said earlier, they're on college campuses, they're talking about banning the First Amendment, the attacks on all the memorials and the graves of the Confederacy, even though under U.S. law they are considered U.S. American military veterans. And the whole idea from that agenda is to create a single population all blended together with no clear idea who they are, where they come from, to make a pliant workforce to support the rise of a new feudalism. That's one agenda that's going on out there. Obviously, from the United States of America, they're in a race right now. They understand the U.S. dollar is on the verge of collapse. China's yuan is now being accepted by the IMF as a global trade currency. The United Nations is on board the movement to say the U.S. dollar should not be the single go-to currency any longer. And so from the U.S. point of view, they're really desperate to get World War III going for real. And World War III is really between the U.S. dollar and the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan. And we're going to see billions of people get killed in this argument over whose brand of ink and paper we're all supposed to use for the next 100 years.
How close is China becoming the world's reserve currency?
Well, they're joining the IMF's basket of global trade and reserve currencies. It's still dominated by the United States, but not by that big a margin. And the reality is that now that there are alternative global trade reserve currencies, the dollar is in serious trouble. From the end of World War II and the Bretton Woods Agreement up until Richard Nixon's gold shop, there was the dollar, and that was it. There were no alternatives. You couldn't go to any other currency for cross-border trading. Those days are now gone. A lot of countries have signed agreements for direct exchange of their relative currencies. The IMF is accepting other currencies for global trade and banking. The U.S. dollar hegemony is very much in collapse, and the real master agenda behind all of this is the U.S. wants to drag the world back to the 1950s when everybody had to go through the U.S. dollar and all natural resources are sold only for the U.S. dollar because the U.S. economic system makes money off of that by loaning those dollars out at interest or by getting very favorable trade deals where other countries have to send us manufactured goods or agricultural produce in exchange for stacks of ink and paper.
Do you think the Fed will hike interest rates in December?
I know they're talking about it to try and boost confidence in the U.S. dollar, but every time they talk about hiking the rates or actually doing it, it's going to crash the stock market.
Michael, anything else you wanted to throw in today?
Well, this is a very, very dangerous time, and my concern is that we're going to see a lot more of these false flag terror attacks trying to goad the world into a global war. We're coming up on our Thanksgiving end of this month. We're coming up on the Christmas, New Year's holiday. And at this point, from the point of view of the U.S. government, they're desperate. They can't turn around and go back without the economy and the government imploding. They have to keep on going, victory or death, with victory measured as the world going back to U.S. dollar hegemony.
Michael, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me.
My guest has been Michael Rivero, founder and editor of WhatReallyHappened.com. You're listening to The Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on The Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.